Hi, and welcome to the Essential Craftsman Podcast. I'm Nate. I'm very happy to have Dustin Ruth on our show today. Now, you don't know Dustin, but you've heard his voice if you've watched our videos. We've used a lot of his music over the years, most memorably in our video titled Sawmill Story, which was really a special video for us. It was kind of some family history and telling the story of the sawmill my dad built. And those songs of Dustin's, especially Cold Moon, were absolutely a perfect link in tone and in lyrics and in overall feeling with what that video, with the story that video was telling. Dustin has had a really neat career. He was a musician for a lot of years. He played in a band called Ruth. They traveled all across the country. He worked in a mechanic's shop, his father's shop. He helped manage that and kind of package that up till the business could be sold. And he's currently working as a commercial airline pilot for Horizon Air, flying lots of passengers all over the western United States. He was a pilot in Alaska for a while. He is the real deal. He has lots of experience, and he's just a really terrific human being. And I'm so happy he joined us, and I hope you enjoy this discussion. And if you are a younger person who has career thoughts and you're trying to decide what type of work you might enjoy over your life, then I think this might be extra enjoyable for you because, as you've just heard, Dustin has seen a lot of different things. And without any further ado, my interview with Dustin Ruth. Well, thanks for coming on, Dusty.
Thanks for having me.
Before we start talking about your career flying citizens and passengers all around the United States as a commercial pilot, I want to talk about your two other careers. Do you think you've had 3 careers? Do you ever think about it that way?
Sort of. I mean, I don't know if I think of them as like 3 full-on careers, like how our dads would have had careers or our grandpas, where it's like you put in 40 years, 50 years, but like certainly I've been in 3 different types of industries, you know, for a good extended period of time, and gotten, I think, deep enough in each of those to have like some good taste of it, I guess. So
let's talk about being in music first. And I told the listeners in the intro and played a couple of the songs that they have probably heard in some of our videos. But what was that like? Because I don't even know the details, but I'm guessing right out of high school, you kind of dove straight into a music career with a band. And why don't you kind of walk us through what that was like and how long that lasted and what it's like looking back at it now?
Sure. So right out of high school, I actually moved to LA, saved up some money, was working at Papa Murphy's, and moved to LA to pursue music, and didn't have a band at the time. But over time, I moved back to Washington State, where I'm from.
Hey, I hear that all the time, people moving to LA for music or acting. What does that actually mean? Does it just mean there's a lot of gigs there and so you can find work easier, or what's going on in LA that people are doing? Explain what that was like for you on a day-to-day basis.
Like pre-COVID.
Yeah.
This is pre-COVID. This is the beginning of internet. This is the beginning of a lot of things, camera technology, all kinds of stuff. So like, you know, what's going on in LA now versus what was going on 20 years ago, it would be a lot different potentially.
Yeah.
But at the time, and it still is, there's like Nashville's a music city, like LA is an entertainment city. So there's a lot of industry going on. That's what's going on. So you have, you know, filming, you have recording, you have so much entertainment industry there that, and I mean, I was 18, so that would have been a great question for me to like actually think about prior to moving there. But, you know, at the same time, like you do get there and it's like I was living with 5 other roommates, all of which were actors, and one of them worked at a management company. Another one was a musician. So everybody's trying to make it, and what is making it, you know, we could go on for hours about all that, but it's basically just a city where everybody kind of flocked, at least at the time. And I think they will again in the future, but to a certain extent, but it's kind of a city where it's like the epicenter of like that industry. So running, you know, you're working with people that are trying to do what you're doing. They know people. It's a networking opportunity.
So if, like, as a musician, there might have been separate from gigs, but even just jobs and needs for people who needed a singer or a guitarist or whatever case may be. There's just
could be. I mean, I didn't really know exactly. I just thought that's how you did it, you know.
Wow. And so what happened? You were there for how long? And then
I was only there for a year.
Okay.
And a lot of stuff happened. I mean, but nothing happened. You know? But then I moved home and started playing in bands. And I guess maybe I went down there and I recognized like what I wanted to do with music a little bit better.
Okay.
And so I got into playing with bands, and then through that process, sort of refined my understanding of maybe what music I actually liked and what I wanted to like sound like. That's always evolving and stuff. But it's kind of feels silly even talking about all this.
Yeah, well,
like,
I guess the point is though your bands eventually led you to touring across the country.
Yeah.
Several times or more than once, or
yeah.
What was the next 5 years like with, or how many years were you in these bands and doing music full time?
Well, I think the record deal that, I mean, I've had a handful of like record deals, licensing deals, things like that with projects, but the main one that kind of got things going was with Tooth and Nail, and that was, I think I was like 25. Huh. So it was like maybe a good 7 years after I had like moved out, moved home, like, you know, and everything. Wow. And so like all I ever wanted to do was music. I mean, that was like my first love, you know, and still is. I don't think that ever really goes away. I still write, I still record. It's just evolved on a business level as to where and also a hobby level as to where I like try to utilize that as far as like a business goes, you know. But yeah, and then from there we toured quite a bit. I mean, the band with that deal, we toured for maybe about 3 years, pretty solid. Mm-hmm. I think we did the US like over a dozen times, maybe. I mean, it's enough where you're stopping at like gas stations in like Iowa or, you know, Alabama. And it's like, oh yeah, this is that one with like, you know, yeah, you've been there a few times. And then like we did, you know, a Europe little stint over there tour, and then Southeast Asia and stuff like that.
Wow.
But it was short lived, but it was also like, well, it wasn't a long time coming.
It wasn't that short because if you spent 7 years before that deal, and then I'm guessing a few years during that phase, and so how long did you spend with music as your main thrust?
I think those 3 years was pretty much what I would consider like professional musician, I guess. But then after that, I continued to make music, even though it was kind of on the side. Actually, everything's always on the side except for music in my mind, but in people's perspective and in reality, music was kind of on the side at that point. And when you're speaking about business, like the streams of revenue for music sort of changed, like from live playing and like selling merchandise and trying to sell CDs and downloads and that sort of a thing to like TV film placement and commercial placement and still like downloads, but mostly streams. And so that sort of business model like sort of changed, just like every other kind of business out there has to kind of like morph into what works for them. You know, you start off making gizmos, and then like some guys like, hey, can you make this? And it's a gadget, and then like and then like everybody starts wanting the gadget, but you started off thinking gizmos was what you were gonna do. And
when you were probably a young pup, music was completely different because that was before Napster, where it was selling CDs was the revenue item, and then all of a sudden downloading came into existence, and so you've seen a couple shifts over the years in that.
The industry is kind of changed dramatically, and we were kind of in the middle of that like weird like slack tide, I guess. The tide wasn't coming in and the tide wasn't going out. Like the industry was like, how do we harness like, you know, labels and licensing companies and management and all the business side of it was like, how do we like capture this to like make money again, you know, because it was changing so rapidly. And I think they have, but I was kind of in that slack tide period where it was like really difficult to like figure out. Everyone was just treading water, like
nobody knew.
I don't know where to go.
The artist didn't know, and even like there wasn't even a business model that made sense for a while.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Before we move on, do you have an opinion? Are you optimistic about the music industry in general in terms of for musicians? Is it a time to be excited if you're a musician and optimistic, or is it sort of that's an era that has passed and who knows if it'll ever be quite the same? What do you think?
I think that number one, like take my opinion as a grain of salt or with a grain of salt, whatever people say, because I'm not like this super successful, superstar or whatever, but I do think it's an exciting time, mostly because the technology has gotten to a point where it's like insane how good of a recording you can do on your own. Like when we started, it was like huge budgets and inside of, really nice studios and stuff and drum rooms for certain sounds and isolation booths, and and there's a place for that still. I think it's really cool when you can do that. But like the last project I did, like the bulk of it was on an iPad with GarageBand. And, I was like working in Alaska, like in a village with generators for power. And I just have this little mic that's like a lightning mic and headset. And I'm able to like do a lot with that. And then I took that to my buddy who then, put it into Pro Tools, which is a more professional grade, I guess, what you would have, most people use it. And, so it's exciting because you can, with such less equipment, you can like be inspired at any moment and then just like lay it down. And
take us through phase 2. You kind of made a decision then to move on from music, or what was this transition like, and what was the next little micro career that you can tell us about?
I wish I was like as good with words as your dad, like just so
ditto.
Direct and like
don't we all,
not using weird filler words and stuff.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think, well, what would Scott do right now? So the second phase was, my dad had owned a business all growing up of automotive repair, just general mom and pop shop, and things had started to slip because a lot of the small business was struggling in 08, 09.
Yeah.
So early 2010 is when I started working for him again. I had worked at his shop off and on all growing up. And I didn't say like, oh, my focus is the shop now and automotive repair. Like my focus was music. Yeah. And I still planned on doing that. I still did that on the side. But my dad really needed help, and it was a great opportunity for me to work for him again and continue being able to make a paycheck and stuff.
And like you said, you could do music from your own house with a lot of the same results to some extent.
Taking some of what I had learned from some of the professionals that I'd been around.
Yeah.
Implementing that into, recording on our own or recording with other professionals, but just being able to produce ourselves and stuff like that. So I worked for my dad at the time, and really, I don't really know. I'm kind of just like whatever's in front of me, I'm like gonna like just try to do to my best ability. And when I see my dad struggling or stressed or whatever, it's like, Dad, what can I do to help? So I was kind of able to come into the business not with like a lot of business experience, even though I'd been doing that with the band on the road and working a merchandise table and ordering t-shirts and product and selling them for whatever, markup and stuff. I had some idea of that, and then working with the band themselves as like a team, and you've got mechanics that are like your team. And anyway, so I did have some experience, but I learned a lot at the shop of just like cutting out like the excess that we didn't need to have of overhead there, and helping just skeletalize the shop to where it was like, most efficient during that slow period. And my dad was always a quality guy. He would use the best parts always. It was a time where you kind of had to say, Dad, like these people can't even pay their mortgages. Like we'll give them the quality estimate, the best parts with the best warranty, but we're going to give them an estimate with, or you can do this. It's not what we recommend, but if you're just trying to get by,
let them choose.
Yeah, exactly. And so start giving them options, really communicating with people. I think that's like the biggest thing, especially in automotive, anything in life, but
especially automotive.
Look, this you have to do right now if you want to drive this truck, you know, but, and I would do this right now, but you could probably get away with it for 6 months. This is going to have to be done in the next year.
But it's not just explaining those things, because any mechanic can do that, but it's doing it in a trustworthy way,
Sure.
and helping them understand that you're being very honest and you're not trying to trick them. I got to think that a lot of customers are very skeptical of pretty much everything their mechanic tells them, just because they don't see it with their own eyes. Am I right?
Absolutely. Like, everyone comes into the automotive shop.
Okay, like that. That's what I'm trying to say.
All right, my car is what's happening.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
And you just got to win them over. But you can only win them over. Well, I mean, I feel like you can only win them over with just authenticity and like complete like good communication. Yeah. Like, and fortunately, my dad had always been a very honest man. You know, he had the business a couple decades before I really started working for him. And so I just kind of picked up where he was starting to get tired, you know what I'm saying? And for the next 5-6 years was able to kind of help build it back to what it needed to be to sell and them to move on. And that's kind of what brought me to the next chapter.
Yeah. And I remember when you, I don't know if you had fully decided where to take it, but you started taking flight lessons and got that first, I guess it's just is it basic or the intro pilot's license, or maybe it's just
private
a pilot?
Pilot.
Yeah. I remember when that kind of happened. And I think at that point you were still kind of toe in the water, but I was amazed how many years and series of tests. And Allie would always say, okay, Dustin just passed and got his license. And I was like, this is like the 10th time he's passed the test.
There's memes about that.
And got his license. This is
yeah.
insane. And then I would say, my next comment was like, oh, great. So he can get a job for an airline now and start being a pilot. And she's like, well, no, he's got to now. And I was like, I give up. So let's pivot to being a pilot and maybe kind of take us through the quick version of that. A lot of people understand a private pilot's license, so you can fly yourself and your family around. But once you get to the next step, I mean, maybe just help us understand what happens next.
Sure. Like I said, there's a lot of jokes out there about like trying to explain to your friends what you just accomplished, you know, in the pilot world. Cause like, it's like 1 minute you get your pilot's license, the next minute it's like, oh, I can fly in clouds now. And what does that even mean? I thought you know, and then like, it just keeps going. But anyway, there's kind of a series of types of flying or styles of flying. The general aviation kind of private pilot's license is that first step of just understanding, you know, aerodynamics and the rules and regs and a lot. I mean, dude, it's very drinking from a fire hose, you know? And once you get into that, you know, then once you accomplish that, is a huge accomplishment to anyone who's done it. I mean, hats off, you know? But then from there, there's a whole nother style of flying, which is instrument flying. So you have to become instrument rated, which is those two are the two big ones, I would say, where it's like, you know, you get your private pilot's license, which was like a huge undertaking. But then to go on and become an instrument rated pilot is like just as big, I would say. And
instrument rated means you're flying by only looking at your dashboard. Is that
correct? Yeah. And it's actually getting like more and more technology is getting less expensive and more compatible with small planes and whatnot, to where I think that instrument style flying, it's going to be a little easier to accomplish because there's been so many advances in everything in our world, but including aviation, that, you know, it's made it easier and user friendly to like be able to have these certain tools and stuff within the cockpit. But it's super challenging to fly in weather because you're using navigational aids at that point, and you're also using instrumentation that you kind of couple with those navigational aids to make sure you're in a good pitch attitude, turn, you know, whatever bank, you know, angle you're trying to turn at, or your timing, everything's timed, everything's kind of planned out in this instrument world where you're in clouds and you can't see, and you can't really trust your body because your body is like, man, I feel like we're turning right now, but you got to just trust those instruments. Like, we're straight and level and we need to stay straight and level or whatever. It's very easy to run into mountains or run into, end up in an unusual attitude because you start trusting yourself and not the instrumentation. And that's where the tricks are.
Is that the rule that you always only trust your instruments bottom line? Or do they give you a little like endless, or is it like black and white?
In instrument flying, it's pretty black and white. Now, you don't just trust your instruments no matter what. Most all the instruments in an aircraft and almost everything about aviation is redundant.
Yeah.
So there are usually generally 3 instruments that are telling you the same thing, but in a different way.
Oh, so if you're not certain, you double check it against
You're always,
a couple other
and that's
ones.
Called a scan. You got a scan going. You're
got
like,
it.
Okay, this says my wings are level. That says my wings are level, and that tells me my wings are level. But they don't look a lot alike, and they're kind of giving you different information. But they're all indicating the wings are level. We're not right. Climbing, we're not descending. And there's that redundancy throughout.
Okay.
And then the way those instruments work is also from several different sources, so that some of them may be off a vacuum pump on the engine. Some of them may be these things called a pedostatic system or electronic, gyros. So a lot of those instruments are redundant in what they tell you, but they're also like used off different systems. So if one player of the 3 is telling you something different than the other 2, that's when you start not trusting the instrument.
And you could think there's a faulty instrument
exactly.
here and pin it down.
And you kind of train for that.
Got it.
Because it can be very deceiving.
Well, this speaks to these Boeing 740, whatever plane crashed twice, I guess, that killed everyone on board, where it was an instrument telling the pilot one thing, and so was he diving then? I can't remember.
Yeah, I haven't read all of the reports.
Point is, it was a conflict between reality and the instrument. I've
read enough of those reports that almost all of them is that case. When it comes to like that level of aviation, you know, it's almost always an instrument faultiness of some sort, some sort of automation or instrumentation that's doing something. It may be giving you some sort of false information, and then that leads you down a trail of like, hopefully figuring out what's going on.
Hopefully.
But usually it's a chain of stuff. They always teach you that, and that's the same in life. Like you don't just end up in jail one day. You know what I'm saying? Like you there's usually many points with which you could have pulled the plug on that road you were on or whatever.
Interesting. And flying has that same component.
Yeah. And that's what the NTSB and the FAA, when they go to like investigate these wrecks, they kind of uncover that trail a lot of times, which always comes back no matter what to the pilot in command.
Yeah.
So, constantly it's always the pilot's fault,
Yeah.
But then as a pilot, you look at those accident case studies, and it's like, it is easy to see how someone could have got into that position, and then you just try to learn from it, and you try to like make a mental note, like, for yourself and whatnot.
So since we're on this thread, we're gonna fill this gap in, but you are flying. How many passengers fit in your plane? Yesterday you flew to Vegas, and how many people were you carrying?
During COVID, it's been different, but we can hold 76. We're trying to seat people in their own rows unless they're with each other, and we had 56 going to Vegas, which was...
So what's that like? I mean, like you said, it's the pilot's responsibility. Is that just a heavy mantle every time you step in the aircraft? Or does it kind of, like all things, like I drive my family in the minivan, and I don't feel a heavy mantle when I'm driving the vehicle. Mm-hmm. What's that like? Or are you still kind of maybe ask you that question 30 years from now? Or what's that like? Seems like a big responsibility, and I don't know how I could do it,
I think anyone who's like I can't say anyone, but I would say like a very high percentage of pilots that are at this point in their career, so to speak, and even pilots that fly 4 passengers. And I mean, I used to fly 6 passengers and 7 passengers up in Alaska, and the weight of that responsibility is no like greater or smaller. Mm-hmm. So I when I say at this point in their career, I'm not trying to say that to be, I mean, I loved that flying probably more than I love the flying I do now.
Yeah.
But I would say most pilots are very, that does weigh heavy on them, everything from the pre-flight inspection to while we're checking weather, while we're looking at the flight plan, analyzing the co-pilot and the captain, kind of like basically like sort of analyzing them as you're doing your pre-flight, checklists and flows, and you're talking about the flight itself, which is a process. You're kind of always looking for what we call threats,
Yeah.
And I know that sounds silly, and yes, we do get into a routine where it's like we've done this, like you're not like anxious every time or anything like that. You're not like, you're always like looking for like potential things that could be a threat, and everything's redundant in that regard too. Checklist, one's reading, one's doing.
Yeah.
When you do your approach briefing or your departure briefing, which is basically just, we're going to run through everything verbally that we plan on doing. We're going to be departing off 26 left, and we'll be flying the, whatever departure procedure, which has different fixes on it. I mean, we're just we talk about everything before we do it. You think twice before you push something. You know what I'm saying? So yeah. I don't know. That was a long answer.
No, that makes sense.
I'm sorry.
So in the trades, let's just, as an example, although I'm sure there's lots of careers where it's this case, there can be characters who are doing pranks and silly and jovial and goofy. Our pilots generally, you've got to know probably dozens and hundreds of very serious pilots. I'm hoping that type of person doesn't make it all the way to being a pilot, or
well, you're looking at them.
Or is that still something that shows up even in the cockpit, just somebody a little goofy and
yeah. I would say a lot of pilots, as I've gotten into that circle of people, are kind of odd, like socially a little bit. I'm always like asking my wife what's wrong with me, like, please tell me.
Like these guys? I'm not one of them, am I?
I love them. And I mean, like, but they're kind of a certain personality to get through all that training and like that math and reading and stuff that I'm not that good at. There is some joking around. I would say I tend to be more on the like light side. I think having done the shop stuff for so long and then the band stuff, like, my perspective of aviation was like, wow, I really like this. Like, I'm going to keep going.
Yeah.
And like, but it was never, I didn't grow up at age 15. Like, I just want to be an airline pilot.
Right.
A lot of these guys this has been a lifelong journey, and they've dedicated so much to it,
Yeah.
And, so for me, I'm just like, oh, if the economy crashes, that would really suck. But like, I'll go work on cars in my backyard, or I'll find something to do. I got a pressure washer. I'll go start pressure washing concrete or whatever,
Yeah.
Whereas like a lot of these guys and gals, this has been their whole life, and they have like big aspirations. Like they want to be flying for FedEx or UPS or, United Airlines across, huge oceans and big airplanes and stuff. And I'm just kind of like, I don't know where this is leading me. And like, I'm just enjoying it today. And, I'm not that like free spirited, but I'm like free spirited probably more than them a little bit.
So so
there are jokesters like me, and they do make it through the cracks.
But they're probably not the same level of jokesters as on a construction site where they're literally like throwing boulders off the top of the building.
No, and when you were telling me about that, I'm thinking like aviation also is like you get drug tested all the time.
Yeah.
You're like, you get a medical once a year before 40, twice a year after 40. That's like kind of like a physical, but more intense, I guess. So you're monitored, your physical health, your mental health, your drug use. It's pretty.
It's not for goofy people. It's for serious people.
It sort of
Thankfully.
is.
Hallelujah.
Yeah.
I couldn't be more grateful for the oversight.
I don't want to be serious, dude. I want to be goofy.
I want you to be serious.
All right.
So before we talk, I want to talk about just the rest of the career path. And you hinted at it's kind of the next bigger plane. But before we do that, let's circle back before we get too far away from flying in Alaska. And so my understanding, basically you get however many licenses and certifications till you can finally be allowed to receive a paycheck for flying. And your first job doing this is in Alaska. Is that right? And if so, that has got to be like not an easy type of flying, and seems like a contradiction that that's where a brand new pilot would start. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's lots of paths to get to, I guess, the airlines someday, if that's your goal. Some people do flight instruction. So like they'll become an instructor and then instructing the same planes they grew up learning in, and then some people, they'll build their time that way. You have to have so many hours to like have certain types of job in aviation. When I say hours, I mean like actual flight hours, prop spinning, So that's one route. There's lots of routes. I mean, but there's lots of them, lots of different ones, but each one's kind of like niche, and like there's only so many job opportunities available.
Okay.
The one in Alaska, there's not a lot of roads. I mean, there are highways that kind of string along the main part of Alaska, but pretty much everything that's like west, southwest, north, northwest, there's like no roads to. So, and there's a lot of people that live there in villages, and they use waterways mostly, and then aviation as their way to get back and forth or get supplies in and out, or mail, or Amazon Prime,
Wow.
whatever they need. And so it's a part, like a lot of different parts of the world actually have a lot of aviation, mostly like developing countries and stuff that don't have road systems and things like that. And Alaska is part of the 50 states, but it is sort of still its own country in a lot of ways. That's what people mean when they talk about it. It's like there is a different way of life up there that's much more comparable to maybe if you were to go to like parts of Southeast Asia, where it's like, flying in and out of villages and like bringing in and out supplies and
like waiting for supplies to land. And until then, the town doesn't have whatever certain thing.
Yeah. And, a barge comes in once a year.
Yes.
So, and that fills up their Jet A for burning, their heaters the rest of the year or whatever, but
wow. So
it's a different place up there. It has US currency. It has like, when you get into the cities, the same fast food restaurants we all know.
Yeah.
But, for the most part, the outskirts of those cities is like very much its own thing.
So it's got, the cost of living in those little villages has to be high, right?
It's extremely high. And we could talk for hours about that.
So
a lot of it's government subsidized, like,
okay.
Because we get so many resources from Alaska, like, it's almost a tax you pay for what you're taking from
like
that
oil?
state. Oil, we get minerals,
Salmon.
obviously fish and all kinds of seafood. And Alaska is like super rich with natural resources. And there are people who, lived there before us, and the Russians obtained it, and then we bought it from the Russians, and that whole thing, is kind of, you can read about it.
So these villages are kind of supporting the industries and the oil and fishing and mining that's going on. Is that what's happening in these villages?
I mean, somewhat. I mean, most of the villages are just people who have lived there for long periods of time, who are just still retaining somewhat of their original place and stuff. And they're not, some of them do work in the mines. Like we would drop workers off in the mines and stuff like that. The reason why I went to Alaska was there's a lot of flying there because of that.
So all these villages need aircraft to bring people and supplies and all that.
So that's another route to getting your hours and your experience. And I felt like, all right, I'm kind of late to this pilot game. Like I think when I started, I was 33.
Oh, and most pilots at that part of their career,
they're already doing what I'm doing now. They've been doing it, at an airline or whatever. So I was kind of like, I need to fast forward, and I want to be the best pilot I can be. And if that kind of challenging flying, if that door opens, I'm going to just take it.
Yeah.
And hopefully learn a lot and not like tarnish my record at all as a pilot to where I can't get a job. So it's kind of rolling the dice a little bit, like could easily have an incident or an accident that like ruins the rest of your career. But at the same time, if you kind of make it through it, you can get really good experience really fast. The learning curve is very sharp. And I just wanted to know, like, if I'm going to be flying people around in a big jet, like I want to have the experience that I feel will make me the most competent for me, like, and so that was why I dove into that as a 30. At the time I got hired there at 35. So I was like,
wow,
I've had not a career. I sound dumb now, but I've been working on cars, like, my dad's shop or whatever.
I still think you've
like,
had two other careers. You have been through two separate industries completely. And so starting into
I wanted to get this one in as fast as possible as far as like soaking in everything I could. And fortunately there were like amazing people up there, pilots who like take this nugget, take that nugget, learn this, learn that. Let me show you how to do this.
Well, what are those pilots like? Does it pay better than it's got to be more dangerous than the average pilot job.
It's more dangerous.
Does it? And it's certainly more remote and probably less fun. It's not like you're spending the night
in
Vegas
or fun,
whatever.
Though. There's aspects of it. I mean, if you love flying, which the actual art of flying, which I would call
didn't
it,
consider that. Yeah,
it's so fun
compared to just like the same old like being almost like a truck driver where it's like I'm driving.
It's a school bus or whatever.
A school bus, yeah.
But like that's a good way. And I kind of like am learning as I'm working at the airlines, like it is a different style of flying. So there's its own challenges is all I'm trying to say. Like it was very challenging for me to learn this jet with like this guidance panel that's like all these different buttons for different commands that you want the aircraft to do. And then like, it's just way different. The precision that you do there is much different than the precision you do in these little planes going in on gravel runways with mud spots and potholes and you know what I'm saying? And really stiff crosswinds on compacted snow and ice and things like that. So they're both challenging in their own ways. I would say the Alaska stuff's far more dangerous. Like which it should be, considering, I mean, you would want to hear that as a passenger in the lower 48 or anywhere else in the world on a massive jet. Like, I hope this is more safe than, and it truly is, but it's not necessarily less challenging. So I had that false mentality and like pride that was like, oh yeah, like this is going to be way easier. Yeah. There's aspects of it that are, but there's still challenge to it. Yeah. And it's a whole nother world of flying. It's the 121 world versus the 135 world, which those are legal designees or whatever in the FAR. So like there's different regs for one and different regs for the other. And it opens up a whole nother can of worms of knowledge you got to kind of have. And so standards you got to like fly by. If
someone was listening to this who's interested in being a pilot, do you think that that's a route you'd recommend? Go to get a job in Alaska. I don't know how long you were there. It seems like a couple of years, but is that a route that you would recommend to someone looking to jumpstart their career? I mean,
every person that I sit next to in the jet at the end, where the end game for a lot of these guys, I feel like I can see how they earned it. They're gifted in their own way. So whatever path, you end up taking, whether that's like the CFI route, the aerial photography route, the what are they called? Jump pilots that like have like parachute jumpers, and that's that's all they do all day. Doesn't matter. You're gonna learn some really rad stuff about how to fly, and you kind of wear the airplane in any of those.
Interesting.
I think the Alaska stuff, there's just it has its own thing, and I wouldn't really want to tell anyone what to do because like then if they got hurt or they didn't go as they planned, I'd feel really bad. So
it's not for the faint-hearted though, I would assume.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not saying I'm not the most courageous person, I mean, or I guess like I don't know how to define courage versus like bronziness or whatever. Yeah. Like, but I'm not the kind of guy like when I first started off learning, I remember Amy and I were laying in bed and she was like, the lights were out and she's just like, but and this is before I ever really started flying, but I was like taking like classes to like learn. She's like, but I mean, have you thought about like just being in a little airplane at night, like just cruising along, like, and I'm like, stop talking. That's terrifying. And like, so like going to Alaska and stuff, it was like a target, but like, I had faith that by the time I got to that day, I'd be able to swing and make a hit, you know what I'm saying? And not be like terrified.
And you did.
And I never wanted to do that in music. I never thought I would stand in front of like thousands of people and play my songs or whatever.
Yeah.
And when the day came, I like put in the in-ear monitors and like walked up out on stage, and it wasn't for me, they were for the headliners, but, and just like start strumming and singing, and it was just like came out. And like, that's kind of how it worked in Alaska. It was like, this is my job now. I'm going to pack this plane and fly to Lucknock, or, I'm the captain
and I'm flying, and you just, you rise to the occasion. There's probably parts about that job that were challenging, separate from just the crosswind and the potholes and the ice. I'm thinking just staying in these tiny villages and having to pass time with no sunlight. And there were probably parts to it that were not super fun, separate from the risk and the challenge. Am I right?
Oh yeah. I mean, the good news is a lot of the pilots you're around, you're all kind of in it together.
Yeah.
There's this camaraderie.
Yeah.
There's like, I've never been in the military, but being in a van with a band for like months on end, scraping it by, and then like being up in these villages and like flying where it's kind of dangerous, and like every night we'd all get in and do our dinner together, and it was like war story time and joking around time, and like the jokes we had played on each other that day, and it was just like that camaraderie was like the closest thing to like a military experience I think I've ever had. It was like going to war every day. But even though it's not, I'm not downplaying that. I'm not trying to like compare something that's apples and oranges, but that camaraderie was like fun. Now it was really challenging with the darkness and the cold and the wind and stuff, but like it beat being like dealing with really frustrated customers about cars, or like things like there a mechanic who's like ready to throw a wrench at me or whatever. Like I'm like, this is still great. You know what I'm
also
saying?
Not
like,
very fun and also scary.
Exactly.
So we'll probably wrap up on this, but you're flying 50s to 70 passengers in your jet right now, and
it's my jet.
Yeah, your jet. And I know the career mentality is to get certified on the next larger jet and the next larger jet. So what do you think is in your future in terms of flying? You gonna do that and keep stepping up till your FedEx?
Well, I mean, FedEx wouldn't be so bad because it's cargo. I like cargo like probably more, honestly. Mm-hmm. But I never really had goals beyond where I'm at, other than just being a captain in the type of aircraft I'm flying now based where I live. So like right now, when I started working for the airlines, I wanted to work for Horizon, which is who I work for. That was my goal. Like if I was going to work for an airline, it was going to be Horizon, because it was just like a local airline that, I mean, they're big, but I grew up around people who worked for Horizon. They were like salt of the earth people. And like, there's a lot of love for flying, I think, within our pilot group that kind of disappears when you kind of go up the ladder to like, I don't think it ever goes away completely for any pilot, but it can kind of become more about like the paycheck and like the toys back home and how much time off work am I going to get, which is stuff I should probably care about more than like flying. But like, there is this kind of heart there for, I think, aviation in that like Horizon Air Group that's like, I don't really care to live outside that too much. Like, have a decent schedule, be based where you live, like come home more often than you're away, and you may make half as much or maybe even less, but it's enough to have like a very good life, So
wow.
I don't know.
Well, that's really great. Now, you got several websites and YouTube channels, and probably on Spotify. So why don't you go through all the places and hit where everybody can find all of your stuff and music, and maybe we'll even play, we'll see, but maybe we'll play one of your music videos or let something stream at the end of this so people can kind of
Sure.
tie it all together. But why don't you tell people where they can find you?
I think there'd be so many places it'd take forever, but I think like the main ones would be like Spotify and iTunes and, you know, Amazon. You can find my music on those, and it's either under Dustin Ruth, which is like all my solo stuff, or Ruth the band, which is the band stuff that I've put out. And I mean, we have a YouTube, Ruth the band, and then also Dustin Ruth on YouTube, just / Dustin Ruth band. And there's some music videos up there. But that's where my music is, and it's been a great way of like expressing myself and putting stuff out there.
Yeah.
Even after I've had these other careers and stuff. So
yeah, well, that's really cool. We didn't, and maybe we'll have Dustin back, but we didn't get to talk about, he's one of these unique people who has actual eagle eyes for wildlife. He hunts and fishes and has that kind of unique ability to like just see through camouflage. I don't get it, but so it'd be fun to kind of talk through that a little bit. You might be one of the most well-rounded or diversely equipped people I know. So there you go.
Man. I don't know about that. Well, I don't know how far that will get us, but I do like finding some game. It's really fun.
Yeah, you know? He's got the skills. And do you have any pictures of any of that on Instagram or anything?
Yeah, my Instagram's Dustin Ruth.
And there's probably some shots of some
I've got
sheds
like
or some bucks
sheds and probably antlers. Like I just did some moose antlers that I brought from Union and Cleat. When I got done with my job, I midway through working up there, I was able to acquire a moose rack. Not that I shot, but from a villager there, a native Alaskan that was kind enough to sell those off to me.
Did he shoot it?
He shot it, yeah.
Wow.
And he's trying to get his pilot license. He's trying to get money for his pilot license.
Oh, cool.
For lessons and stuff. And so I bought those off him.
They're massive.
Yeah.
They're enormous. Yeah. Massive. Is it a rack for a moose?
Yeah, moose rack.
Moose rack. Yeah. Well, go find them on Instagram. I'll put
hello.
Yeah, I'll put some links in the video description here on YouTube. Thanks for coming on and chatting with us.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
If any of you have questions about piloting or career, Dustin's a really nice guy. Shoot him a message, and I'm sure he would help you out. I could just picture younger guys, you know, trying to decide some of these same decisions. Career choices are hard. That's just, and it never gets easy, to be honest. I still feel like I'm making career choices, and you probably are as well. So
I don't know what I want to do when I grow up.
It really helps though when that you can hear or talk to somebody who has been down a route that seems appealing. So so there you go. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.
Warm sun rising blinds my eyes with light that passes through my bones. Warm breeze breezing fills my lungs with hope that a brand new day has come. Will you not deliver me from the hand of my enemy? Warm sun rising blinds my eyes with light that passes through my bones.